Justice is an eternal ubiquity and obliquity. And it's certainly not for me to try and determine what justice is. Some of the greatest minds in human history have set that task upon themselves and go on committing themselves to that definition this weekend, and the jury is still out. The great conversation goes on as we stumble increasingly, perhaps, towards becoming a world with generally accepted guidelines for what we believe justice to be globally. Growing up in a large family, I quickly learnt a keen sense of what is fair and what is not from my siblings. And we certainly feel deeply when we believe an injustice has been done to us by another. In a digital world, we're confronted with global injustice on a 24-hour cycle. But our beliefs are not always shared. As Martin points out in the story he just told of the struggle to outlaw slavery, considered by many to be absolutely justifiable, to the point of being defended by the English Parliament and the letter of the law. Often throughout history, the artists and the writers, the poets and the journalists, the philosophers, the religious, would turn their minds towards these issues, wrestle with the ethics and try to bring new arguments to the foreground. And often it was the media who shone a light on these issues, giving a wider audience to new ideas previously hidden from the sight of the many. I remember back in 1982 when we had just released our first single as Goanna, Solid Rock, talking to the managing director of Warner Music in Sydney. He was a man who enjoyed a drink, and he said to me one night, he said, "Shane, the artists, the poets, the painters, they write it, paint it, sing it. 20 years later, it's legislation." It's interesting how that stuck in my head and still resonates for me now as almost a truism. I don't know that I can change anyone's mind with a song, but I know that by adding a part of light to the sum of light, hidden things in time may be revealed. I can say with some personal certainty that many ideas that were considered fringe and on the periphery 30 years ago have now drifted into mainstream thinking. But change is slow and a slave to its own history. But neuroscience assures us that justice may well be hardwired into the human brain. And our punishment instincts come with inbuilt governors, including powerful urges to forgive if the right signals are received. I'm a writer and a musician, and the song Solid Rock, and with my band Goanna back in the early 80s, through me, catapulted me headfirst into mainstream commercial success, at the same time that it threw me headfirst into Aboriginal Australia, two very diametrically opposed worlds. At the same time that I was being fated in that commercial mainstream world, I was also sleeping on Aboriginal people's floors where dinner was bread and butter and jam, and seeing a very different Australia. The deepening contact and relationship for me with Aboriginal Australia right across the country made me realise that I needed to pay attention and learn from the First Nations people how to get my bearings, how to understand what Manning Clark had described as the spirit of place, the genius loci. How do we find a sense of belonging here in this landscape, in this country? Many extraordinary people show me great friendship, great hardship, great truth, great reality. I remember in 1983, Goanna got to play for a land rights rally in Perth, and we were asked to perform. An old man from up in that Pilbara and Kimberley region was asked to speak. He was a great champion during the Nunkambah struggle and many of the great land rights struggles in the 70s and 80s, Nipa Tapiji. And he got up to speak, got to the microphone, and he spoke in Walmatjari, I think, quite definitively and defiantly, and then went and sat down. And everyone applauded politely, but no one knew what he said. And the woman who was convening it, went over to him and spoke to him, and he nodded his head and got back up and came over and said the same thing in English. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he said something like this. He said, back in the old times, our old people were here, and some white fellas been come here. And they say, oh, okay, if we come here and stay here. And our old people said, yeah, you're right, you can stay here. You can camp down there. And then after a while, those white fellas came back and they said, oh, there's some more white fellas coming, okay, if they stay with us. Yeah, you're right, they can stay down there with you, you'll be right. And then after time, a lot of white fellas started coming, and no one was asking our old people. And one time our old people went to see everyone and said, hey, hold on, too much white fellas coming now, no one's asking us, checking. And those white fellas said, oh, you have to talk to the boss. And they said, well, who's the boss? They said, oh, King George. And they said, well, where's this King George? We want to see him. And they said, oh, well, he won't come here, maybe for a long time. And they said, well, that's no good, all our old people will be blind by then. And we're still waiting for King George. And that pretty much said it all.